Hi, you guys. And today, as you read the title and you probably saw the cover, this girl body shamed me. So, before we get into the story, I need you to like, subscribe, and click post notifications so you can get more videos whenever I upload. And as soon as I figure out how to, I can send a link to my Snapchat and my Roblox and my Twitch account. So, let's get into it. Basically, and so just ignore that. And yeah, so basically, what happened was I was on the phone with her, right? We was playing Roblox. We used to be like friends, whatever. And I'm not gonna say her real name on here, but let's call her. Let's call her Sophie. So basically, me and Sophie were playing Roblox. So then we got, I forgot why, but I think we got mad at each other about something. But we was on the phone playing Roblox, and we was playing one game, and it was called Destroy the Teletubbies. So in Destroy the Teletubbies, I don't know if you can hear it, but it's thundering right now, and it's almost 12 o'clock. So this you're gonna hear a lot of stuff, and we're playing Destroy the Teletubbies, and in Destroy the Teletubbies, there's going to be like lots of noises, lots of explosions because you're using guns to destroy the Teletubbies, obviously. And then I don't know if you know this already, but if you don't, basically, when on the phone with someone, say you just answer the phone and you say hi, how are you? It's not gonna it's not gonna like just quickly tell you hi, like it's not gonna give you the audio say hi, how are you? It has to go through like a system before it gets to you. So it's gonna be like an echo. It's gonna be like hi, how are you? Hi, how are you? So basically, she thought that it was going to be like, hi, how are you? Straight out. So while we were playing the show, the Teletubbies, she was saying, do you want to play a different game or something? While I was still destroying the Teletubbies. So I couldn't hear her because it still has to go through a system and get to me. So I wouldn't know if she's talking or not until I heard it. So then basically she kept saying, do you want to play something else? Do you want to play something else? Do you want to play something else? And I couldn't hear her because I was playing the game, which has lots of loud noises, and there's multiple people in the game, so it's obvious going to be more loud noises than she thinks. And then after that, she got like really mad, and she said she sent a chat on Roblox or whatever while we were still playing the game, and then she was like, "I know you saw that," and I was like, "No, I didn't." And then I started playing the game again. She said that she was saying, "Do you want to play again?" She said, "Do you want to play a different game?" And then she got mad. So after that, she said I was deaf, fat, and ugly. So yeah, I don't know if you heard that, but she said I was deaf, fat, and ugly. And I'll never forget those 3 words. So then, like, I stopped after that, and that's when she said that. So then I said something back to her, but I really don't remember. And I don't care if you don't believe me. When I say I don't remember, I really don't remember. I can remember her words, but I don't remember mine. As I said, I will never forget those 3 words. So then, basically, I said something back to her, and I do remember saying her head is shaped like a potato because it is. It's literally like, and yeah, I hung up after that. And before I hung up, she didn't say nothing. And before I hung up, I said, you. And then I hung up the phone. And then I was going to text her, don't call or text me until you can apologize. And before I could say that, before I could send that message, she said, but the things I said were true. Now, I could read the chat to you guys, but you're not going to really see me because I'm using my phone as the light. See, using Snapchat. So I blocked her, but I can still read the messages. So let me see. Okay. So before I could send that, as you can see, I don't know if you can read it or if it's backwards, but I sent this message right here and I was going to send it before she sent that. And she said, the reason I said that is because it's true. And I said, don't call me again until you can apologize because I couldn't hear you. And she typed that quicker since it was a smaller sentence and that one was bigger. And then after I said that, she said, Ayor instead of sure. So then so then I said I should just block you and not undo it. And then she said, you let's kept shooting so you couldn't you let's kept shooting things so you couldn't hear me. And I said, okay, and I wouldn't know you're talking. And I said, and then she said, every time I spoke, you shot something so you purposely couldn't hear me. And then she said, I don't know if you can see it, but it says SOWHH. Should I say sorry? And I said, and she kept sending things before I could send that, so it's making the conversation delayed and it's making it worse. And it's making it worse. So I said before I could send that, she said, I said, and even if those things you said were true, you had no reason to say it. This is why there's always a problem with you and your friends don't even play with you. And she said they do. I played with Lillian this morning, and and then she said, "Look at you." And I said, "I hope you know the phone has to catch your voice, and then I receive it, so I don't hear you as soon as you sy it. I meant to say it, so I wouldn't know if you're talking. Like, are you slow?" And then I said, "Yeah, you." So this is another clip. I'm going to do multiple clips because my storage is critically low, so I have to do multiple clips on Snapchat now. So I said, and I hope you know the phone has to catch your voice, and then I receive it, so I don't hear as soon as you just sy it. Meant to say it, so I want to know if you're talking. Like, are you slow? And I said, yeah, you played with her this morning, not a whole day, not when you're playing land. And she said, you should have said nothing. She said, should have said something, not my fault. And I said, not when you're in the car, not when you're in the airport. And then she said, hey, and I said, I was the only person you called. She said, actually, I sis played with her at the airport. And I said, you called her right after the plane landed. You called right after the plane landed. She called me. And she said, did. I'm also on the phone with her right now. They got you. And I said, we bonded on the phone all day. And I said, and then she said, not true. And I said, it's W break from you. And I meant to say, it's A break from you. So I put A. And she said, I was on the phone with her this morning. And I said, you said that already. And I know that. Then she said, why'd you say we've been on the phone all day? And I said, those things you said had no reason to say it. So I'll say it again. And she said, you WWE acting dumb. And I said, don't call or text me until you apologize. And she said, I ain't saying sorry anytime soon. And I'm blocking you. So bye. And I said, even if I was, you didn't say that, dumbass. And I said, like, you make no sense. And then I said, I'm reporting spam because we don't need more problems on Earth. And then I said, oh, by the way, I blocked and reported your Roblox for bullying. And she said, cool. And then this is a whole new chapter. Her little friend called me. I mean, not called me, text me, telling me to stop talking to, telling me to stop. She said, stop talking to my friend, you bitch. And I said, who the f- are you? And I'm just gonna sum it all up so I don't have to do too many clips. And then she was talking about some Chloe, or she was talking about some Sophie, whatever. I forgot what I said her name was. I'm just gonna say Chloe because that's her name. And she said Chloe told me that I told multiple people to text her, and she said I have evidence called Chloe. I said no, I didn't, and I said your evidence can lie. She said no. She said no, she won't. I've known her longer than you. Yada yada yada. She said she was gonna call the police on me for harassment, and cyberbullying. And she said she was recording the whole conversation. I told her I was taking screenshots, and then she called me a stalker because I said, "Why do I want to know what she's doing?" Like, use your head. Are you stupid? I said, "Why do I want to know what she's doing?" That's not saying, "Okay, what is she doing?" And then she said, "Do you know who I am?" And I said, "No." And she said, "It's the third clip." And she said, no, she said, do you know who I am? And I said, nah, I don't need to. I said, so I'm going to block you. She said, who am I then? I said, I just said, I don't need to. She said, you're really, and then I said, you're really getting genes from her. And I said, and then she said, but I need you to know. And I said, okay, tell me. She said, nah, figure it out. And I said, either you're going to tell me or I'm not going to know. She said, such as the L or N. And I'm not going to say her name on here. And then she said, not her, maybe, I don't know. And I said, and maybe, I'm not gonna say that. And then she said, by the way, I've been recording our whole conversation with all my friends behind me. We had a sleepover, and they're all, and all their phones are on the keypad saying 911 for harassment, cyberbullying. And I said, I hope you know I've been screenshot. She said, yes, records are better for the popo. And she said, you live in Baltimore, Maryland, so I watch out. And she probably only knows that because I told Chloe. And Chloe probably told her she's not a threat. And I said, yeah, I know lots of people do. And I said, yeah. And she said, yeah, I know. Yeah, I've heard. And I said, I'm so proud you know. And she said, thanks. And she said, by the way, my friends are calling 911 right now. And I said, I actually reported her for cyberbullying already, so yeah, I could just send it to the police, but okay. She said, I'm on the phone EF with the police, and then she started spamming to myself, okay, and she said, and then I said, oh yeah, you committed a crime, you threatened me. Because saying, oh, you live in Baltimore, Maryland, go watch your back, it's basically like the same, it's basically like the same thing saying, oh, you live on North Avenue, watch your back, I can come to your house. And I told her, and she kept spinning with okay. And after I told her that, and then I said, the more you type, the more I screenshot. And she said, thank you for harassment. And I said, nobody harassed you. And cyberbullying, wonder, whatever. Nobody is bullying. Nobody is bullying but you. And I said, really, oh really? She said, oh really? Congrats, you're getting blocked. And I said, you know what? Call me. I want to hear that you're on the phone with the police. And I said, you just called me so you can do it again. And then she said, no, I don't know you. And I said, but you just called me though. She said, no. And I said, I have records. And she said, no, you called me. I said, no, I didn't. And she said, if I call you, it will be with me and Chloe. And I said, if I called, it will say declined. Not showing her number, but it says missed. I don't. It's backwards, but it says missed call. It would have said declined call or outgoing call if I called her first. This is the fourth clip, and she said, "If I call you, it'll be with me and Chloe again." And I said Chloe will be recorded because my phone has a feature where if you go on the phone with someone, it has the option where where you can record, and then once you finish recording, it'll actually it tells the people when you're recording. It says, I think it says something like you're being recorded or whatever. And she said, so you're just recording 911. And I said, okay, so And I said, if I call, I should hear police. And she said, you will. And I said, okay, I'll call. She said, okay. And I said, all I hear is a phone ringing. And she said, we are, WR didn't even called you. And she said, called. And I said, yes, you did. You called me first. She said, girl, I lit said we when she said WR. And I sent her the thing, again. And then she said, since when? I said, me. And I said, it was a decline if I called. And I said, look, I'm blocking you. I don't have time. Like I told her, the more you text me, the more I'm going to screenshot. Because every time I say I'm going to block you, you keep texting me. And every time you say you're going to block me, you keep texting me, telling me stuff. Like, I don't got time for you. So, yeah, that's basically what happened. It's 12 o'clock in the morning right now, and I need to get me some sleep. So, like and subscribe, click post notifications. Go check out my Snapchat, and bye.